Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for attending our webinar today. My name is Sarah Panik, and I'm an Education USA advisor here at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. In today's webinar, we'll be talking about undergraduate study in the US and how to go about choosing a university, how to go about funding your studies, what the application process is like, all of those great things. And there will be time at the end for questions. I will ask that you hold any of those questions until the end, just in case I answer them as we go. So you might just wish to make a note of them off to the side, and then I'll let you know at the end when we're ready for questions. And just to let you know, this session is being recorded this evening. And so if for some reason your internet starts acting up, or you end up not being able to stay for the whole session, or you just want to know that you'll be able to refer back to the information and not have to memorize everything as I'm saying it, rest assured that in the next week or so, I will be sending out a recording to everybody who is registered for the session. And just to tell you a little bit more about myself, as I said, my name is Sarah, and as you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm not originally from the UK. I am from Chicago in the US, where I completed both my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. But I've been living in London now for the past 8 years, and I've been working at Fulbright for the past 5.5 years or so. So very excited to be here with all of you today to present this session. And to tell you a little bit more about the US-UK Fulbright Commission and who we are and the services that we offer, we were actually established over 70 years ago by a man named Senator Fulbright, who studied in the UK himself as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. And in the aftermath of World War II, Senator Fulbright wanted to encourage cultural and educational exchange. And so we are a not-for-profit organization jointly funded by the US and UK government to promote peace and cultural understanding through educational exchange. And we do that in a number of different ways. One of the ways we do that is by offering scholarships for postgraduate study and research in the US and the UK. And then we also offer an advisory service to assist students, parents, and advisors with applying for US universities. And this advisory service is part of the Education USA network, which is a US Department of State network of over 400 international student advising centers throughout the world. And our aim as Education USA advisors is to offer free and unbiased advice to help UK students study in the US. And we're also the only official source of US study in the UK. So if you're looking for US study, you've come to the right place. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about why students choose to study in the US, because over 10,000 students do choose to go from the UK to the US for their studies each year. And you'll see some of the reasons up here on the screen, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about all of these. So first of all, the quality and reputation of US universities, then also the variety. There's over 4,500 US universities offering undergraduate degrees compared to about 120 here in the UK. Within that 4,500, there's a huge range of personality and style. And we encourage you to pay as little attention to rankings as possible and instead focus on fit. There are many high quality institutions in the US that you've probably never heard of. And you'll hear me talk about this more as we go on in this session. Going to the US also offers the opportunity to experience campus life and activities. US universities are known for having a really vibrant campus life and encouraging students to be involved outside of the classroom. There's all sorts of ways to get involved, similar to some of the societies and clubs that you have here in the UK. There's going to be sports, there's going to be student government, there's going to be music, but there's also all sorts of other random things. For example, American University in DC has a cheese club where students come together to try different cheeses together and enjoy cheese. Everybody in the club really enjoys trying to eat different types of cheese. And of course, there's also just the idea of going and cheering on the American football team at a university. Sports are a really big deal at a lot of universities in the US. So that kind of, depending on where you go, can be a big part of the experience if that's something that you're looking for as well. I'd also like to talk about the academic flexibility that's offered in the US and the liberal arts and the focus on teaching. So one of the top attractions for UK students in studying in the US is that US universities follow an educational idea of something called the liberal arts curriculum, which provides a well-rounded education. And what this means is that you have the flexibility to explore interests before selecting a major. So you can actually apply to university undecided about what you want to study at university. Some universities don't even let you select what your major is until your second year at university. The liberal arts curriculum means that universities in the US have an emphasis on teaching and an engaging classroom environment. And it gives you the opportunity to study a variety of different subjects. If you do know what you want to study already and you already have that subject picked out, that's fine too. Many universities are going to let you start taking some classes in that, but then you'll still have the opportunity to take classes in other subjects as well. So for instance, there was a student that I worked with that was really passionate about computer science, and he knew he wanted to pursue a degree in computer science. He went off to university, started that degree. He also had this passion for philosophy, and he was able to take philosophy classes alongside his computer science degree and earn what's called a minor in computer science, which just means that he spent sometimes taking a small number of classes in another subject as well, in addition to his major of computer science. It also offers the flexibility for students who might change their mind. I know of another student who started their degree set on biomedical engineering, had taken all the subjects in high school, focused on engineering, very math and science focused. Then they got to university, realized that actually when they were taking their classes, engineering wasn't what they were passionate about. They weren't as excited about it as they thought they would be. And they were enrolled in a feminism class that semester. They ended up switching their major from biomedical engineering to global gender studies and becoming the first student to major in global gender studies at that university. And so it just goes to show the type of flexibility that the US allows. So you can imagine why this is one of the top reasons that students from the UK choose to go to the US, because it is something that is very unique to the US that's not offered in the UK. And then this might be surprising to some of you, but another top reason that students choose to go to the US is the funding opportunities that are available. And we're going to discuss this later on in a lot more detail. But know right now that there are many opportunities to find a variety of scholarships in the US as compared to the loan-based system that's here in the UK. Going to the US also offers you the opportunity to internationalize your CV. As you might imagine, studying abroad is appealing to employers. It shows that you've got a boldness to do something different. It shows that you're developing those interpersonal skills, cross-cultural communication skills. You also have the chance to build networks of friends and professional contacts with people from around the world. And while you're in the US, you actually have student job opportunities as well. You can work up to 20 hours per week during term time and 40 hours per week during holidays on campus. And then you can also work for up to a year after graduation and up to 3 years if you're studying some subject in the US. And then lastly, going to the US offers the chance to learn about a new culture. And of course, this is another top reason. The US spans 6 different time zones. It has a great diversity in geography and cultures, depending on where you are. There are long summer holidays in the US that give an opportunity to explore. And also just living on campus at a US university helps you get to know US culture. So these are some of the top reasons that we see students go from the UK to the US each year. And now to highlight some of the key differences. You may already be familiar with this, but a bachelor's degree in the US is typically 4 years compared to a typical 3-year degree here in the UK. Typically in the US, when you're applying to the university, you're applying to the university as a whole, as opposed to applying to a particular academic department. Again, this reflects that liberal arts curriculum and the fact that you might not be choosing a major until your second year of study, compared to a very course-specific degree here in the UK. There's less government control over universities in the US. This means that there's more institutional diversity and freedom, but it also means that there's no set fees or centralized admissions process. The application process is slightly longer and more in-depth because the admissions process is more holistic. It's not just looking at your grades, but it's looking at a variety of different factors that I'll talk about in more detail later on. Something else to be aware of is that if you are going to be looking for any funding to help you fund your studies, you're going to be applying for that alongside your application for admission. So it's going to be happening simultaneously. And then another thing to be aware of is that law and medicine are only studied at the postgraduate level in the US. They're not studied at the undergraduate level the way that they are here in the UK. And just to highlight some terminology differences, which I may or may not have already started slipping into the presentation, high school in the US is considered grades 9 through 12 in the US, and that corresponds to UK secondary school, which is years 10 through 13 in England and Wales, years 11 through 14 in Northern Ireland, and S3 through S6 in Scotland. In the UK, you say university. In the US, we say college, university, school, institution. So we use all those different words to mean university. This was something that really confused me when I first moved here, and I would be asking people where they went to college or where they went to school, and I would get some very different responses from what I was expecting. And I didn't realize that the terms weren't as interchangeable here in the UK as they are in the US. So in the US, we say college, university, school, institution, they all mean university. In the UK, what you call modules in the US is referred to as classes or courses. And then what we would call a degree program or a major, you would call a course. So you can see where sometimes the terminology can get a little bit confusing. And so this information is helpful to know as you start researching different programs and different schools. And this is a useful timeline that you may wish to follow as you go through the process of applying to US universities. We typically recommend beginning to research universities about 1 to 1.5 years before you plan to enroll. So that's typically at the end of kind of year 12 if you're in England and Wales. If the universities where you're planning to apply require any admissions exams, you'll want to take those kind of over the summer before your final year of school. And then in the autumn of your final year of school, you'll be finalizing the selection of where you're going to be applying. This is usually about 10 to 12 months before you're going to be enrolling at a US university. And we're going to go over some strategies on how to select those universities of where you're going to apply. And then about 8 to 10 months before you plan to enroll, you'll be putting together an application and submitting according to the deadlines. So depending on where you're applying, you're likely going to be applying to university either by some of the early deadlines in November time or by some of the regular deadlines by like the beginning of January. Again, this varies by university, but that's typically some of the normal times where students will be applying. Then, depending on when you apply, you'll have the decisions of whether you've been admitted or not by the springtime. And once you've got all of those decisions, then you'll be able to notify the university of where you're planning to enroll. Typically by the 1st of May, you'll be notifying the university that you'll be planning to enroll. And then about 1 to 3 months before enrollment, you'll be applying for your visa. You'll probably come back to us at that point and watch one of our visa webinars that we hold in collaboration with the US Embassy and the consular team here in the UK. And we'll also be holding different pre-departure webinars over the summer for students who are headed off to the US. You can attend some of those. And then you'll typically start your studies around mid-August to early September. So the calendar is a little bit earlier in the US than it would be here in the UK. Now I'd like to talk about the process of choosing a university. This is a really important step in the process of applying to US universities. And it's really important to think through this step. And the key is going to be flexible. Because there's over 4,500 universities in the US, it does mean that it's a daunting process to narrow down your prospects, but we're going to discuss some strategies that you can implement in this process. So first off, it's important to know the context of the US as you consider applying to US study and choosing which institutions that you'd like to apply to. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's no national set standards for universities. So universities are free to choose their own set of fees, their own course structure, their own student environment. Whereas in the UK, institutions tend to have set fees and fairly similar environments. This means that there's so much variety amongst institutions, which, as I touched on, is one of the appeals to US study. And while it can seem a bit daunting of how you're going to narrow all that choice down, it's actually a great thing to know that there's so many universities and so many different types, because then that means that there's bound to be a university that's a good fit for you. And we are going to talk about funding later, but I just want to plug it a little bit here, because if funding is important to you, then this needs to be considered from step one of the choosing process, because you want to make sure that you're only going to be applying to universities that offer financial aid to international students. Again, we'll talk more about this later, but note this as being very important already in this step of researching universities. And then something else to keep in mind is that you should complete your UCAS applications alongside your US university applications. Perhaps you'll be looking at UK universities that offer the opportunity to do a year abroad. Just make sure that you're keeping track of all the different deadlines of everywhere that you're applying. Here's that word fit again. The first step in the choosing process is going to be figuring out what factors are important to you when you're choosing a university. And we focus a lot on that term fit and on finding what school and program is going to be the best fit for you and your personal and academic interests. And there's a lot of different factors that you can consider both in and outside of the classroom. So you're of course going to be thinking about the types of programs and the departments. You'll be thinking about the location of a university. You'll be thinking about the availability of funding. You'll be thinking about the campus size. Do you want a really big university with tens of thousands of students? Are you looking for something really small where you're going to recognize pretty much everyone you see, or something perhaps in the middle? What's the academic environment like? Is it a really rigorous and competitive environment? Do you thrive in that kind of environment? Or is it more inclusive and supportive, and that's the type of environment that you prefer to be in? So begin thinking about factors like this that are important to you more broadly, and then you can start prioritizing those. Some other ways to think about it. If you don't like the cold and snow, then the East Coast might not be the best fit for you. Or if you're trying to save some money, then being aware that living in an urban place is definitely going to be more expensive than living in a rural place. And again, I encourage you to think beyond rankings, but to think about this variety of factors. Rankings in the US don't work the same as they do here in the UK. Sometimes they don't rate the quality of teaching or the graduate prospects. And some rankings even give weight to how much money a university has, or they just invite universities to peer rank themselves, and that's how the rankings are created. They can still be useful tools in helping maybe to identify universities that you've never heard of, especially if you're looking for like a particular subject. But they shouldn't be the only method that you're using to choose a university. So once you've figured out what factors are important to you and started to prioritize those, the next step is to use that information to begin researching universities. And unlike with UCAS, you're not limited to 5 universities. In theory, you could actually apply to as many as you'd like, but for time and financial reasons, we typically recommend applying to about 6 to 10 universities. And to jumpstart your process of choosing, you'll want to focus on narrowing those 4,500 institutions to a list of about maybe 10 to 20 that could be a good fit for you and that you can start researching in more depth. So how do you do that? On our website, which I'll show to you in a screen at the end, there's a whole section about choosing a university in the undergraduate guide, and it includes a list of links to different search engines that can help you with this process of narrowing down your choices of universities. So I'm going to go through an example of one now to show you what this process looks like. So this is one of the search engines linked on our website that's called the Big Future College Search. And it gives you the opportunity to use a variety of different filters, including the type and the size of school, maybe a location by state, if you're looking at a particular state, the different majors that are on offer, if you do have an idea of what you're hoping to study. So you can start taking all those factors that you were thinking about and start applying them to some of these filters here. Oftentimes, they may even have, for people who are looking for funding, a filter related to funding. So in this particular search engine, there's a whole affordability section, and they have a section there called financial need met. And you can go in and select the percentage of need that you're hoping to have met. And that will help you narrow down your list of schools to schools that are going to offer aid. You'll also want to make sure that you take the box titled Aid for International Students to make sure that you're only searching universities that offer financial aid for international students, if that's something that you're looking for. Now, of course, with these search engines, you're always going to want to double check this information on each university's website just to make sure that everything that these search engines have is correct and up to date. But without any filters on this website, there's over 3,600 universities listed. So I've just put together an example here. And so in this particular example, I've put in a variety of filters to narrow down the list of schools. And so I said that we want to attend a four-year school with fewer than 9,000 students in the state of Ohio that will meet 100% of financial need for students who are looking for that type of aid. Now, this brought the list of 3,600 universities down to 4 universities. And as you can see, that's a much more manageable number. And then what you can do once you've got this list of universities is click through to each of the different universities to find information like their application deadline and a link to the university website. And you can also look at things like the size of the institution, the graduation rate, the average financial aid package, and see all sorts of different options there and go through to the website and learn more. So once you narrow down your options, you'll research them further on each of these different university websites and perhaps even reach out to them directly, with remembering that the ultimate goal is to select about 6 to 10 institutions where you'll actually submit the application. And in this 6 to 10, we have a bit of a guideline that we typically recommend. So we suggest applying to 2 what we call reach schools, where you'd be thrilled to attend, but it would be a challenge for you to get in. And just so that you're aware, if you're applying to any ultra competitive universities, think Yale, Stanford, MIT, Caltech, these are reach schools for everyone. No matter what your grades, no matter what your test scores. So if you're applying to any of those are reach schools for everybody. You'll also want to consider applying to 3 to 4 what we call match schools, where your academic profile is roughly on par with their average applicants from the university. And then you'll probably want to think about applying to 2 what we call likely admittance schools. So think of this as being similar to like a UCAS insurance choice, where your application is going to be very competitive compared to the other students who are applying to the university. And oftentimes, if you're trying to get a sense of how your academic profile compares to other students, you might be able to get some information about this on the university website. Sometimes they'll kind of post some of the data about their admitted students, and you can kind of compare yourself on there. And as I've said, the best place to find the most up-to-date information is on university websites. So in addition to perhaps seeing the profile of the average admitted applicant, you can also find more information about the programs they offer, student life, sports, student housing, financial aid, whether they have any campus virtual tours or online information sessions that you can attend. You'll also want to see what types of resources they have for international students as well. And then you'll also want to check out their social media channels to help get a feel for the college and for the university personality, and to see what kinds of things that they're focused on. And then if you do have questions as you're doing any of this, you'll be more than welcome to reach out to the university. Universities are really happy to hear from you and to answer your questions. So feel free to reach out to them, call them, email them, but make sure that it is the student that's calling and reaching out, because it's going to be the student that's applying and the student that's getting admitted, as opposed to a parent or a family member. And so in these next few slides, I just want to kind of talk you through a few different examples of some universities that maybe you've never heard of, just so that you can get a taste or a flavor for some of the different, the variety of institutions that are on offer. So in this one here, if you're looking for competitive schools, but which are small, collaborative, and offer a lot of research opportunities, you might want to consider a liberal arts college, like this one, Middlebury College, which is located in Middlebury, Vermont. It's known to be a liberal and artsy area of the US, and it's known for its beautiful waterfalls and hiking opportunities. Or if you're a female student who loves palm trees and sunshine, you might consider Scripps College, which is a women's college located in Claremont, California. Or perhaps you want to experience some Southern hospitality, warm weather, and country music. You might look at Vanderbilt University, which is a private research university in Nashville, Tennessee. So these are just a few different examples of some of the universities which maybe you've never heard of before, just so that you can get an idea of some of the different ones that are on offer. And I always like to include a note here about the Ivy League, just to explain a little bit about what that is. So the Ivy League is called the Ivy League because it is a historical sports league between the 8 oldest universities in New England. So it's not the Russell Group. There's no joining the Ivy League. You can't become the Ivy League. So universities such as MIT, Stanford, they'll never be in the Ivy League because they were not part of this historical sports league between the 8 oldest universities in New England. Yes, they are all very well known. They've been around a long time. They offer excellent educational opportunities. But the other thing about them is that they're all private research universities, which means that if you're only applying to universities in the Ivy League, then you're limiting your opportunities to explore other institutions like liberal arts colleges, like women's colleges, like specialist institutions. So just as an example, liberal arts colleges are also extremely competitive. They offer a lot of undergrad research opportunities, but they'll never be the Ivy League or as well known in the UK, despite being really top quality schools and really competitive schools in the US. And just something else to keep in mind is though we advise you to take rankings with a grain of salt, if you're talking about the top 1% of US universities, you're talking about over 40 institutions in the US. And I'm thinking that many of you who are attending right now probably can't name 40 US universities off the top of your head. And they're the top 1% of universities in the US. So that's just something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind about the Ivy League is that they're also extremely competitive. Harvard's acceptance rate was less than 5% last year, compared to Oxford and Cambridge, which I think were between like 18 to 20%, something around that. Don't quote me on it, but it's around that. So as you can see, the acceptance rate at the Ivy Leagues is really, really high. It's really, really competitive, I mean. All right, so now that we've talked about choosing a university, I want to talk to you more about funding your studies. I'll just get hydrated before I do that. So as you might imagine, this is one of the top things that we get asked about. So in this section, we're going to run through the costs that you can anticipate, the different sources of funding that you can pull from, and strategies that you can implement to find funding. So these are some of the costs that you can expect, both in the admissions process and in attending a US university. So first off, there's expenses just to apply to a US university. If the universities where you're applying require an admissions exam, you'll be taking the SAT or the ACT. We'll talk about that more later. They currently cost between about $100 and $200 US. So that's something that you'll want to budget for. Each university application also incurs a fee of about $50 to $100, though many universities do offer fee waivers if you're eligible for fee waivers. There's also going to be fees for your visa, your embassy appointment, and something called SEVIS, which is essentially the international student database that the Department of Homeland Security uses. And that kind of thing is all once you get accepted and if you're headed to the US. Then there's always the tuition and fees. As I've mentioned, costs can vary significantly since each university can set their own tuition and fee rates. Fees are mandatory, and they usually cover things like the student union, school athletics, and memberships to the university gym. One thing to be aware of is that universities in the US are required to post their cost of attendance on their website, and this will typically include not only tuition and fees, but also room and board, and they may also include information on the estimated cost of personal expenses. Sometimes they'll include a trip home. compared to the UK, which usually just lists the tuition and fees. That being said, while the cost of attendance on a US university website might include room and board and some other expenses, you're still having to think about other living costs like eating out, clothing, entertainment, etc. And the cost of living can vary widely depending on where your university is located. And so that's something else that you'll be keeping in mind when you're doing your research on universities. The good news is that there are a variety of funding opportunities available, and it is possible to have an affordable US university education, and many students are able to fully fund their studies without loans. The key is going to be being willing to put in the time and efforts to seek out and apply for funding. So where does this money come from? We'll go more into each of these sources, but it's good to know that typically there's 4 sources of funding for study in the US. And the first, to be upfront, is personal and family funds. So US universities do expect families to prioritize students' education and to invest in that education. But US universities themselves also typically offer very generous financial aid. There's 2 types of financial aid that you're typically going to see at a US university: need-based aid and merit-based scholarships, which I'll explain in more detail on the next slide. But something to be aware of is that it's going to vary how much need the universities can meet. So if financial aid is important, you need to make sure that you're looking for and applying only to universities offering financial aid for international students. There's also external funding bodies, which we'll talk about in a couple of slides. And then lastly, you'll see on here loans. And we advise loans to be your final resort. And the reason for that is because that you cannot take your UK student loan to the US. And if you want a US-based loan, you'll be required to have either a US citizen or a permanent resident that can co-sign that loan. You can technically take a UK third-party loan out to pay for your studies, but we'd caution you to be really careful around high interest rates and payback terms. Sometimes these loans will require you to start paying back the loan before you've even completed your studies and started earning. If you are somebody who's attending tonight that has US citizenship, then you can actually take out a loan and apply to federal loans by completing something called the FAFSA form, just to make you aware. Now, it's likely that you might have to pull from a combination of these different sources in order to fund your education. So I'll talk about them more in more detail now. So university funding is ideal because it doesn't have to be paid back. And there's 2 main types of university funding. University funding is likely to be awarded on the basis of financial need. So that's based on a family's annual income. But there's also merit-based scholarships, which can be based on academic merit, such as A-level marks or admission test scores, or some type of niche criteria. Or students might get a combination of all these different types of funding from a university. Need-based aid is based on financial need. And the way it works is that universities calculate an expected family contribution, and then they compare that to the total cost of attendance, and they try to meet that gap. So it's going to vary how much of that gap that they can meet. Some will be able to meet 20%, some 80%, some 100%. So this is something that you'll want to look for when you're doing your research if you need funding to get to the US and if you're planning to apply for this need-based funding. And just because I find it confusing when these numbers are thrown at me, just to give a little bit more detail there. So for example, let's say that a US university is $50,000 per year, and your family can afford, the university determines that based on your family's income, your family can afford to pay $10,000 per year. And they know that now you're going to need $40,000 per year in order to attend. So some universities will say, okay, we're going to give you 100% of that $40,000 so that you can attend. Other universities say, well, we'll give you 50%, so we'll give you $20,000. So now in addition to the $10,000 that your family's paying, you're still short $20,000 per year. So this is why it's really important if you're applying for this type of need-based aid that you're making sure that you're only applying to institutions likely that can meet 100% of your family's demonstrated need. unless you think you might be able to make up kind of the gap of what a university doesn't provide. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then if you're somebody who's applying for merit-based scholarships, perhaps you're not sure if your family will be eligible for need-based aid, then that's something also that you'll just want to make sure that you're looking at those merit-based scholarships, seeing if you are eligible as an international student, trying to get a sense of what the maximum amount awarded is for a merit scholarship. And this is for any student that's applying for aid, looking at merit-based scholarships, and just kind of comparing that to the cost of attendance so that you can start getting a sense of how much your family might be expected to pay if you receive the full amount of the scholarship, and how much might be left over after that. For top athletes, sports scholarships might also be available through the athletic recruitment process. And we have a lot more information available about this on our website. So if you're somebody who's a very top, competitive athlete, a top athlete, competing typically at like national level or the near national level, you can find out more information about that on our website. To find out more information about university funding, you'll check the university websites and be proactive to find the information that you need. Often the process for applying for financial aid is straightforward and might integrated right into the admissions application. So as an example here, I want to show you the financial aid page from Rice University, which is a big university located in Texas. And you'll see here on this page that this web page gives you a breakdown of not just the tuition and the room and board, but also includes things like fees, books, and personal expenses such as flights home. You can also on their website find information about merit scholarships and the types of recipients. You can see that the process of getting a scholarship is integrated into the admissions process. And there's also a page with funding information specifically for international students. You can see here on this page that international students are considered for need-based aid, and that 100% of demonstrated need is met with grant aid. And they use something called the CSS profile to gather information about the student's financial background and to determine their financial aid package. It's important to check each university website and whether funding is available for international students, as I've said. So I think I've got that into your brains now. As you might imagine, it's really heartbreaking to us when somebody reaches out to us to say that they've gotten into a US university, they're so excited, but they haven't received enough funding to go to that university, or they didn't realize that the university doesn't offer funding for international students, because there's not a lot of options that we can offer at that point. And so if funding is an important consideration for you, you definitely want to ensure that there's funding at the university for international students, and you want to make sure that you're checking into this early. I'd also like to talk in more detail about external funding bodies. So funding bodies might include a wide range of professional, charitable, or government organizations that are external to the university. They can be thought of as niche scholarships, as they have specific criteria based on the mission of the funding body. So this might be something like being from a particular country of origin, a particular ethnicity or religious faith, maybe an interest in a particular field, maybe for certain genders, for students with certain interests or talents. For example, maybe if you're a woman who is interested in engineering, there might be a scholarship out there for women engineers. If you are unique in any way, there's likely a funding body with a scholarship out there for you. You just have to find it. One example of a scholarship that we like to talk about is called the Morehead Cain Scholarship. And the Morehead Cain Scholarship provides a 4-year fully funded educational experience for students of the highest caliber at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. They're specifically looking for students who have the characteristics of leadership, character, scholarship, and physical vigor. And there are thousands of different funding bodies, so searching is going to require time and dedication to sift through scholarship listings and to submit separate applications to each body. And so for this reason, we do encourage students to first apply for university funding opportunities from universities, and then to apply for external funding. And we do have a link on our website to different scholarship search engines that you can search out for these different external funding bodies. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about a funding strategy that you may wish to adopt when funding your studies in the US. So a few different approaches to this funding strategy. One thing that you could do is explore universities in places with a lower cost of living. Just like in the UK, London's going to be more expensive than Lancaster. And in the US, New York and California are going to be more expensive than states like Ohio or Georgia. As I've mentioned, American universities will list on their website the full estimated cost of attendance, including tuition, fees, cost of living, and personal expenses. So you can scope out places with lower costs of living as a way to cut down on costs. You might also look at programs with lower tuition. So just looking at different options that might have different lower tuition options. And as discussed on the previous slides, different funding opportunities that are available. I also want to mention community colleges because these might be something that maybe you've never heard of before. And these are an increasingly popular choice in the US as an alternative pathway that can help save a lot of money. So community colleges generally award what's called associate's degrees, which is not a degree that's offered in the UK. It's a degree that often has a professional vocational focus and is earned in typically about 2 years. And typically what happens is that community colleges typically have programs that allow students to do something called a 2+2 transfer pathway. So what this entails is that a student starts their studies at a community college, they complete their associate's degree within 2 years, and then they transfer to a 4-year university where they study for an additional 2 years and earn a bachelor's degree from that university. And a lot of community colleges have transfer agreements with 4-year institutions. So in this example that you see here up on the screen, Los Angeles Valley College is a 2-year community college that has a partnership with universities like UCLA, University of Southern California, and Cal Poly. So these can be a really great way to save money. Community colleges tend to be much less expensive than 4-year universities. So students tend to save thousands by paying a significantly lower tuition of community college for those 2 years that they're there. They also tend to have smaller class sizes, which can be especially valuable for those introductory classes in a variety of different subjects that you're taking at a US university. And that means you have more contact with professors. Community colleges also involve less rigorous application processes and entry requirements than a 4-year university. So they can be a good option for students with BTech or OCR or other similar qualifications. And they don't typically require any admissions exam scores for admission. My husband actually went to community college himself, and he was able to live at home while he did his 2 years associate degree and work alongside his studies. So he was able to actually just pay his tuition as he went. And then he transferred to a 4-year institution where he completed his bachelor's degree. And he only had to worry about financing those final 2 years and taking, finding funding for those final 2 years because he had attended community college for the first 2 years. So he ended up saving thousands and thousands of dollars compared to some of the classmates at his university that had been there for the entire 4 years. There's more information about community colleges on our website, including a link to community colleges webinar that we held in conjunction with a representative from a community college last year. So definitely check that out if that's something that interests you. And some final funding tips to wrap up this section on funding. As I mentioned, since applying for funding is simultaneous to the admissions process, you'll want to begin your search for funding early. It's going to take time to research funding at all the schools where you want to apply and to figure out what external scholarships are available as well. Some really good funding resources are going to be the university websites and also online scholarship searches. As I mentioned, we have a list on our website. You're going to want to consider having some type of funding strategy to fully fund your studies. You're probably going to need a combination of the different types of funding that we've discussed. Family funds, university funds, external funding bodies, and loans. So you'll want to make sure that you're investigating all these different types of funding and figuring out how you would be planning to fund your studies. And again, it's important to remain flexible in choosing universities. You're not going to want to just be applying where thousands of other UK students are applying, or where you're not going to be competitive. Think about where you might stand out, and so that you'd be competitive not only for admission to that university, but also for the funding that they have available. So now that we've talked about choosing a university and funding your studies, I want to talk to you more about what the application process entails. And it is different than what you will be doing for your UCAS applications. So what are US universities looking for? And first and foremost, they're going to be looking for academic achievement measured by your results. So that'll be your GCSE results, any A-level predictions. If you are in a country where you've taken AS levels, they'll be looking at the AS levels. If you're in Scotland, they'll be looking at those national fives and any hires or at any advanced higher predictions. Some of you might do the IB curriculum. They'll be looking at any kind of predicted grades for that. And if an admissions test score is required, they'll be looking at that as well. If you're planning to apply to some very competitive universities, academics is going to be the most important thing that they're looking for. First and foremost, academics is going to be what they are looking at. And as I mentioned earlier, you can check university websites as they might include information on the average applicant profile. However, academic achievement alone is not going to guarantee entrance to the most competitive US universities, and it's going to be much more holistic than in the UK. And so they're also going to be looking at things like academic fit, your reasons for pursuing a degree at their institution, how it helps you towards your goals. So for instance, let's say that you are applying to NYU because you want to be in New York. You're going to want to make sure that in your application to NYU, you are explaining exactly why it is that NYU is the best fit for you and why you're going to be a good fit for NYU. Because if you just write a whole essay about how much you love New York and why you want to be in New York, the person reading it's going to say, okay, but you could go to Columbia, you could go to one of the many other universities in New York. They want to know, what is it about NYU that appeals to you? So as you're applying to universities, you'll be putting all that research into practice and seeing, is there a particular program or a particular campus activity, or is there a mission, and having this come through in your application. Extracurriculars are also going to be included in your application. There's a big focus in the US on extracurriculars, both once you get to a US university, but also as part of the application to applying to a US university. This doesn't mean that to go to a US university, you have to be involved in everything and all these extracurricular activities. It does mean that a US university is interested in knowing how you spend your time outside of the classroom, and they want to see that on your application to help understand you as a person and help understand what your passions are. They're also going to be, through the course of your application, looking at your personal attributes. Remember, it's a holistic admissions process, and US universities are looking to diversify their campuses and classrooms. They don't all want a whole group of students that's exactly the same. They want a group of students who's bringing all sorts of different strengths and perspectives and their unique views. And so they want to know who you are. So some of the other things they might be looking at in your application is if you do have an academic field of choice, why you're interested in that. Maybe they'll be looking for something about your character, maybe your leadership abilities. They'll really be trying to get a sense of you and who you are. And the different application components where they're going to be figuring all of this out are listed here on the screen. And unlike in the UK, you're going to be applying to each university individually rather than through a centralized body like UCAS. And you can apply to as many as possible, though, as I mentioned earlier, for time and cost purposes, we typically recommend applying to about 6 to 10 schools. There is something in the US called the Common Application, and around 900 universities use the Common Application. This is a system that kind of helps streamline the demographic aspects of the application. It's not like UCAS, and that you're still going to have to tailor all of your applications to each university. There's going to be like some different questions asked. There might be some different supplementary questions, but you'll at least be able to kind of have all that demographic information sent out. And there'll be one main essay that you write that gets sent to any of the universities that you apply to through the Common Application as well. As I've mentioned, there's no standard process for applications, deadlines, requirements. It's going to vary by university. Each university is going to set its own deadlines and application requirements, but most applications are going to follow a similar format, and so you'll be able to reuse or adapt the materials that you prepare for each. Most applications are going to include an application form with your basic demographics. If they require it, they'll ask for an admissions test score. They're going to be looking for a transcript, which is something your school will provide, and I'll talk about in more detail in a bit. They'll be looking for you to write some essays. They're going to look for some letters of recommendation from people at your school. And then, as I've mentioned, they'll be looking for an application fee of about $50 to $100 per application. So to go into more detail about some of these application components, first I'd like to talk about the admissions exams, because we always get a lot of questions about this, and I'm sure that you might have some questions. And first of all, just to make you aware of the role that they play in the US. So in the US, there's no national curriculum at the secondary school level. So admissions exams provide a way to evaluate applicants from diverse areas in schools. So to help compare a student who's going to school in in Chicago and Illinois, where I'm from, with a student who's going to school in Alaska, where they have completely different curriculums. An admissions exam kind of helps a university compare these students. You're going to want to check if admissions exams are even required at the universities where you're applying. It might be that they're not required, and you might decide that you don't need to take them. Especially since COVID, more and more universities have made admissions exams optional. And so it could be that it's just up to you whether or not you want to take it. But that being said, there are some universities where admissions exams have been required all the way through. And so, or they weren't required during COVID, but now they are required again. And so it's just going to be important to kind of check the information. There is a website called fairtests.org that has a list of the test optional universities. But you'll want to, as usual, double check the information on each university's website just to make sure that the list is up to date. Universities that do require the ACT or that do require an admissions exam are going to require what's called either the ACT or the SAT. So they're the two admissions exams that are accepted by a university that either requires them or makes them optional. The ACT and SAT, we like to kind of compare them to Coke and Pepsi, and that they're extremely similar, but people tend to have a preference for one over the other. And so what we typically recommend for students who are choosing to sit this exam or are required to sit this exam is that you go online and you find a free practice test online and sit the practice test under timed conditions. So one ACT and one SAT, and see which one you do better in, see which one you prefer. I know I personally did much better in one of the exams than the other. And so I much preferred to submit my scores from the one that I did better in compared to the other one. And so you might prefer to only kind of prepare, revise, and sign up for the one that you seem to do better in. Or maybe you do about the same in both of them, and then you just choose which one is more fit for your learning style. Trying to think if there's anything else that's useful for you to know about this. Again, you typically want to take an admissions exam the summer before your final year of school. If you are going into your final year of school now and you haven't taken an admissions exam, you'll want to start doing some research about whether the places you're planning to apply require one. And if they do, you'll want to get signed up for one this autumn so that you're able to have those admissions exam scores in hand when you're applying to a university. Another question that we get is, if it's optional, do you recommend that we take it? And that's kind of completely up to you. Some students do really well on exams. They like exams. They take a practice exam. They realize they can do really well on it. and they want to take it so that they can show to the university that they are doing really well. They can see that their score is on par or above the average applicants at that university. Other students are like, admissions exams aren't really my thing, not sure it's going to be a strength. And instead, they choose to spend that time, doing more research on the university or putting together a really strong application instead of spending that time and energy revising for an exam. So it's really just kind of up to you and your strengths and what you think is going to be best for you. Transcripts. So as I said, this is a document that's submitted by your school. And this is going to be a listing of your academic qualifications and marks that are covering your final 4 years of school. So this is years, your GCSE and your GCSEs and your A levels in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And this is going to be your national fives and hires and advanced hires in Scotland. The transcript's going to be generated by your school, but if you're attending a school that's maybe never supported a student with applying to a US university, you might need to provide them with some information about how to put this together. And we actually have templates available on our website. We have a whole resources for UK schools page, and we have a template that they can use to kind of create your transcripts. And the transcript's typically going to include the years that you've attended the school, those GCSE scores, any predicted A levels and why you're predicted those A levels, or the equivalent if you're, the national fives or hires or advanced hires. Now, something to be aware of is that there's no direct conversion between UK and US marks. And so your school is going to be reporting your marks in the British system, and US universities are used to having students apply from the UK, and so they're well versed in what these mean. And your transcript is typically going to be submitted online by your school. Your school may also submit a school report, which is something that contains information about the school itself for context. So it includes things like where your school is located, how many students you have, what types of subjects are offered, whether you're located in a rural or an urban area, all that kind of thing. And this just helps provide information to the person who's reading your application to understand you as a student in the context of your school. And as I said, we've got templates for this on our website. You'll also likely be required to gather 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. And these are going to be a marketing tool for you as an applicant. And typically referees are going to have particular areas that they can speak to, but you might also direct them to speak about things like your ability to succeed at university, your past academic performance, observations about your performance in class or on an assignment, maybe any school awards that you've won, your writing and critical thinking skills, any subject knowledge, any work experience, perhaps your ability to positively contribute to a university department or to campus life, maybe your leadership abilities and your character, perhaps your involvement in the school and community. You're going to be asking somebody to write this recommendation who knows you well, both in and outside of the classroom. And the university does typically provide some loose guidelines for selecting referees. So typically they require 1 letter from what's called a counselor, which is a role that doesn't exist in the UK in the same way that it does in the US. But typically students in the UK might choose like a head of sixth form or a form tutor or a head of careers to be their counselor, who's going to write a recommendation letter about you in the context of your school. So they'll be the ones who maybe talk about any leadership you've done in the school or any extracurriculars you're involved in and any impact that's made on the school. And then you're typically going to have at least 1 letter from a teacher, if not more. And then the teacher is going to be the one who really talks about you as a student in the classroom and how you'll be able to contribute to a classroom environment at a US university. It's going to be your responsibility to choose and liaise with your referees. We recommend that you consider meeting with them to discuss your recommendation letter. It's in your best interest to help them write the best letter that they can. So you might wish to schedule a meeting to discuss your reasons for doing an undergraduate degree, perhaps your interest in the particular universities you've selected, your future goals, your academic achievements, any extracurricular involvements, so you can help kind of provide them with some guidelines. You'll of course want to make sure that they're aware of any deadlines and paperwork to complete, and it's your responsibility to inform referees of the deadlines and the paperwork required. We also encourage referees to avoid being restrained and too modest. As you might imagine, American referees tend to write in an enthusiastic tone, using very positive and descriptive language to discuss the applicant both in and outside of the classroom and to talk about the applicant personally. So keep in mind what's going to be written about your American counterparts when you're preparing your UK referees to write their letters, and encourage them to refrain from being too restrained or too modest in their language. Now I'd like to talk about essays, which is one of the most important parts of the application process for undergraduate study in the US. Strong essays can help set you apart from other applicants and give you an opportunity to showcase yourself to a university. Now, something that's really important to keep in mind here is that an essay for a US university is not like your UCAS personal statement. Rather than submitting an explanation of your interests and your achievements in a particular field of study like you would via UCAS, you're going to be asked to respond to between 1 and 3 essay questions on a US university application. Each university is going to set its own questions, as well as the desired length for your response. As I mentioned earlier, if you are applying to universities through the Common App system, there'll be 1 essay question that goes to all universities that you apply to, but then there's also going to be supplemental questions that are unique to each institution. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what these questions are like and how it's different from writing a UCAS application or writing a UCAS essay, I'm going to read 2 of the different prompts that are available through the Common application. So one of the prompts is, reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? Another prompt that you could choose, describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? So as you can see from these prompts, they're really an opportunity for a US university to learn something about you that maybe they're not finding anywhere else in this application. So it's really an opportunity to kind of showcase you as a person. So it's and something to keep in mind is that it's unlikely that you'll be able to compose one essay that's going to sufficiently answer the questions posed by all the different universities, but many students are able to reuse elements of different essays for different universities. Some tips that we have in writing your essays is that you ensure that you address the question fully. Don't get so caught up in your writing that you forget to actually answer the question that they're asking. I think we've all been guilty of that before. Be sure to use clear, concise language and try to avoid vague or empty statements. If you do reuse an essay, be careful to submit the correct essay to the correct university and program, and double check that all references within the text are to the correct university. You'll also want to proofread extensively and ask others to proofread your essays and offer their feedback. And most importantly, be yourself. Don't give the admissions officers the answers that you think that they want to hear. Give them the truth. And think about what sets you apart and let your personality come through in the essay. We've got more tips about this on our website. We also have links to university websites with example essays. There's some universities that have on their website publish examples of successful essays of students who are now attending their university. And I find it really helpful to read through some of these examples just to get a sense of how the essays are different and just to get an idea of the flavor of these different types of essays. So highly recommend checking some of those out. So that's the application process in a nutshell of applying to a US university. And I'd now like to really quickly talk about some other opportunities in the US. So there's a few different opportunities if you decide that a full undergraduate degree in the US is not for you. One thing that you could do is you could go to the US while at a UK university through a university exchange program. Many UK universities have established exchange programs with US universities or with US-based study abroad programs. So for example, University of Manchester has partnerships with 18 universities in the US. This might be logistically simpler, as your university will help you arrange. And it also gives you an opportunity to use your UK student loan to study in the US, because if you're doing an exchange, you're getting to pay your UK tuition fees while going to a university in the US for that term or for that year. Another option for you is what's called the Summer Institute. There's something called the Study of the US Institutes for Student Leaders. These are intensive short-term academic programs whose purpose is to provide groups of undergraduate student leaders with a deeper understanding of the United States while simultaneously enhancing their leadership skills. So these are short-term programs in the US available for undergraduate students. Or if you really love America, but don't want to go and do your whole degree there, you could spend your degree studying it here in the UK. American Studies programs here in the UK often incorporate a year in the US as well. There's also opportunities for internships or summer work through organizations like BUNAC or Camp America, or you might decide the US isn't right for you for undergraduate study, but maybe you'll pursue it for postgraduate study. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation, there's also Fulbright awards that are available for postgraduate study. And we also offer advice on our website about the postgraduate level and applying at the postgrad level. I'd also like to highlight some of the different ways that we can help throughout this process. So first and foremost, one of the programs that we run here at Fulbright is called the Sutton Trust US program. And this program is in partnership with the social mobility charity here in the UK called the Sutton Trust. This program is for very high achieving year 12 students. So again, that's year 12 in England and Wales, year 13 in Northern Ireland, S5 in Scotland. So if you're a student currently in that year, it's a program for students at state schools in those years that are from low-income backgrounds. The program offers you the opportunity to take part in some residentials here in the UK and learn more in depth about the opportunities available for study in the US. And then hopefully you'll get the chance to visit the US, stay on campus at a US university for a week and visit other universities in the area. The past few years, students haven't been able to go in person to the US because of COVID, but they've been able to take part in some virtual residentials instead. But I know that the team would very much love to return to taking students to the US next summer. And then for students who decide to apply to US universities in their final year of school, they can apply for continued support through the program to apply for undergraduate study in the US. And the program itself is free for students who are accepted to take place in the program. So if you are somebody who thinks you might be interested in that, and you think you might be eligible for that, you can go learn more about that on our website. And applications for that program typically open in early November, I would say. So keep an eye out for that. I also highly recommend all of you check out our website. You've probably been there to sign up for this webinar, but make sure that you revisit it. Our website has everything that I've talked about tonight, but in written form that you can refer back to. So if you go to the section Going to the US, there's a whole undergraduate guide there with details on choosing, funding, and applying. So all these different subjects and going into much more detail that I've gone into tonight. So check it out. We also offer the opportunity to book a one-to-one video appointment with an advisor. At the moment, we don't have any appointments available for the month of September. So check back in October. We're hoping to start offering more appointments available then, if this is something that you think that you're interested in. But in the meantime, we do take questions by email at advising@fulbright.org.uk, and I'll put that email address in the chat for us once I've finished presenting so that you can refer to that. And you can also, so you can ask questions to us via that inbox and we can get back to you there. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions as you go along in the process. We also have various events about studying in the US, such as this webinar here. We also attend different events in person. So you can check our website for different events that we attend throughout the year and different webinars that we offer to learn more about US study. And if you haven't already, You're going to want to sign up for USA College Day, which is being held in London at the end of this month on the 23rd and 24th of September. It's a free college day fair. We have over 120 universities that are coming from the US to the UK to meet with students here in the UK. And registration is open for that now. So again, I'll put the link for this in the chat at the end. So if you haven't signed up to attend the college day at the end of the month, you'll want to sign up for that. As I said, it's free to attend, but you do have to sign up for a timed entry ticket in advance. This is to help us kind of manage numbers of people. Typically, the person from the US that comes to attend this fair is the admissions representative that reads applications from the UK. And so if you come along to this fair, it might very well be that when you're talking to somebody from a university, they are the person who might be reading your application should you decide to apply to that university. So it's a very cool opportunity. We highly, highly recommend that you check it out. So if you haven't signed up for that already, please do. And that's it for the presenting part of this session. And so I am going to open it up now to questions in the Q&A box. I do ask that you keep the questions general, and questions that would be helpful to the whole group. If you have any really specific questions that you think might only apply to you, I'd ask that you email us that question instead, and that we can get back to you about that over email. But if you have any general questions that you think might be helpful to the wider audience, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A box. And if you are somebody who isn't able to stay for the rest of the Q&A section, just to remind you that this session has been recorded and that I will be sending this recording round. So if you do need to head off for any reason, that you're able to do that. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then you can see me. I'm just going to put our email in the chat while you start entering in some questions. And then I also would love to get the link for College Day for you as well. So let me pull that up for you. I should say we also, in the next couple of weeks, are doing some webinars that are called Making the Most of College Day. So this is the link to sign up for College Day if you haven't signed up already. In the next couple of weeks, we're doing some webinars called Making the Most of College Day. So what that will entail, they're hour-long webinars that are going to include like a shorter version of the presentation that I've just given. So some of that information might be a bit of a repeat for you, but then it's also going to include information about how to get the most out of the fair and kind of tips for the fair. So if you wanted to come along to that session as well, you're welcome to sign up for some of those sessions. You'll see those on the event page on our website. Okay, questions. Somebody was asking how many universities are in the Common Application System. So the Common Application System has about 900 universities in it. So there are a lot of universities that use that system, but it just kind of depends. Not all of them use it. So as you're doing your research, you'll see whether that's a system that you'll be able to use or whether you'll have to apply through a different application system that will be available on the website. Somebody is asking if the application process is different for students who are taking a gap year and so already have their A-level results. That's a great question. And so yes and no. So it's not different in the sense that the whole process of applying is going to be very similar. You're still going to need all of those different components. What is going to be different is that you're going to have your results in hand. So on your transcript from your school, you'll have your final results listed on there. And that can be a benefit to a US university because they know that you've already completed your studies and that you've got these results in hand and that you've already kind of achieved those results. So that, that can be to your advantage. Something that you'll want to keep in mind is that if you're no longer at the school because you've finished your studies, you just need to make sure that you've got a way to communicate with the people at school that are going to be providing your recommendation letters. So just make sure that you've got good communication channels and that you're able to communicate well with your school. Somebody's asking if there's a preference from US universities for IB or A level. My feeling is that there isn't. I mean, you're welcome to speak with any universities. If you know, I'm not sure if you're currently a GCSE student that's trying to decide between A levels or IB classes, or if you're already taking A levels or IB and just curious, you can always ask universities where you're thinking of applying if you want to double check. But my feeling and my understanding from speaking with US universities is that they consider both IB and A level to be rigorous courses that they would love to see coming from their applicants. Somebody's asking what the difference is between in-state and out-of-state tuition. So I'll explain that for people who may have aren't familiar with what that means. So in the US, there's universities that are called state universities, and state universities are universities that receive funding from the particular states. And so because they are receiving some funding from the state where they're located, they're able to charge lower tuition to students. And you'll see when you're looking at a state university, you'll see on the website that they might have an in-state tuition rate and an out-of-state tuition rate. Now, an in-state tuition rate is going to be for students who have lived in the state for however many years before attending university, and their families have been paying taxes to the state, and so they are eligible for this in-state tuition rate. Each state has like a different way of deciding whether a student is eligible for in-state tuition or not, but typically international students aren't going to be eligible for in-state tuition because they haven't been living in the state where they're attending university. So typically an international student is going to be paying out-of-state tuition at a state university. That being said, out-of-state tuition at a state university, while it might be higher than it is for students who receive that in-state tuition, it still might be at a lower level than some of the other private universities where you're looking, because these universities are receiving funding from the states. They don't necessarily need to charge as high tuition rates. That being said, state universities don't typically have as much funding available for international students. So it's very rare that they would offer any kind of need-based aid to international students. They may offer some merit scholarships. So those are things that you can look at. So even though they'll typically have lower tuition costs, they might not have as much scholarship money available. So that's just something to keep in mind. Somebody's asking if US universities do virtual tours. Many universities do virtual tours, especially in the last few years with COVID. A lot of US universities shut down. I'm not even sure. Many universities have reopened for in-person tours, but I'm not sure if all of them have, to be honest. And so a lot of them are offering virtual tours. So definitely take advantage of that. Check out their websites and take advantage of that. Somebody's asking if it's possible to get both merit and need-based financial aid. Yes, there are many students who, when they apply to US universities, receive both types of aid to help fund their studies at the university. So, provided that the university offers both need-based financial aid and merit scholarships for international students, if you are applying to a US university that offers this, it's very likely, if you're admitted and you receive aid, that you'll receive both of those types of aid. Somebody's asking if there's any general opinions on gap years from US universities. And so I would say that gap years aren't as common in the US as they are here in the UK. But that being said, I think that US universities are familiar with UK students applying to US universities. And so many of them will have seen students who have taken gap years before that are applying to the university. I would just say that if you are taking a gap year, that the US university is going to want to know how you've spent your gap year. So just like they're going to want to know how you spent your final 4 years in high school, they're also going to want to know what you did with your time on your gap year. So it's just going to you're going to make sure that you include that information in your application. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that it's more common if you are going to be taking a gap year, that typically you'll be applying to a US university while you're on that gap year. deferrals aren't as common in the US as they are in the UK. And so while it's not necessarily impossible to defer, if that's something that you're considering, you may wish to make sure that you're reaching out to universities in advance, because it could be that they don't allow deferrals, or if they do allow deferrals, they'll allow you to defer, but they can't promise that you'll receive any of the aid that maybe you were awarded and that you'd have to reapply the next year. So those are just some things to keep in mind, that typically students who are taking a gap year are going to apply to US universities during that gap year. Somebody's asking how the early application system works. And so I'll try to do it in a nutshell. So there's different ways, there's different timelines of when you can apply to the US. And so there's early deadlines that are typically around November time. And then there's regular deadlines that typically are around 1st of January time. When it comes to the early applications, there's a couple of different types of early applications. There's something that's called early decision. And if you apply to a university early decision, it's a binding decision. So it's a binding application. So what that means is that if you choose to apply to a university early decision, and not all universities offer this opportunity, but some do, then you'll only be able to choose one university where you apply early decision. And you're saying, when you apply to that university, that if you get into the university, that you are promising that you will attend. So when you apply early decision, it's this binding agreement. So you as a student will sign this agreement to say, if I get in, I will attend. You'll have to have a parent who signs this agreement that says, if you get in, you will attend the university. And then your school counselor is also going to have to sign this agreement that says, if you get in, you will attend this university. So it can be a strategic choice for students who know where they want to go, and that this is the university that is for them, this is where they want to be. Because it also says that the university knows that if they accept you, that you're definitely going to attend because you've signed this agreement. But if you're somebody who's maybe kind of still considering all of your different offers and all of your different funding options, then and maybe you're just not sure if you can commit to that university right up front, then it might not be a good choice for you. There's also something called early action, which isn't a binding agreement. And you can, you'll have to look at each university website for the specifics about it. But early action, typically, it's not binding. It just means that you're applying earlier and you just get your decision earlier. So, and again, those early deadlines tend to be around November time, like 1st of November or 15th of November, kind of depending on the university. Or you might not be ready to submit your applications at that point, and instead you'll apply by the regular deadline, which tends to be around the 1st of January. Somebody's asking if they're a dual US-UK citizen but live in the UK, do they apply as an international or domestic student? That's a good question, and one that we get quite a bit from students here in the UK. So for the purpose of a university understanding your grades, if you're somebody who's attending a school in the UK system, so you're taking, A-levels or hires, advanced hires, and you're attending like a UK school, then you'll be considered an international student for the purpose of them looking at your application. You'll be read by somebody who understands the UK education system. But for the purpose of financial aid, you'll be considered a domestic student. And so you'll be eligible for more financial aid opportunities. And so you'll also be able to apply for federal funding by completing the FAFSA form. So for the purpose of understanding your academics, you're an international student. For the purposes of funding, you get the benefits of a domestic student. And then somebody's asking, do US universities accept BTECs? And can you study a different course to what you did at college? So this is something that depends on the university. So as I said, community colleges are a really good option for students who have studied BTECs because they have less rigorous admissions requirements. And then I would say you'll just kind of want to check in with the universities where you're applying. The more competitive universities in the US are going to be expecting to see A levels from UK students, but universities that have less rigorous admission requirements and less rigorous entry requirements will be more likely to accept BTECs and be more willing to accept BTECs. So this is something that you'll want to kind of look at. And in those different search engines that are listed on our website, you can often filter for universities that are kind of the most selective, or universities that are less selective, that have kind of higher acceptance rates or lower acceptance rates. And that can help you get a sense of the ones that might be more willing to accept BTECs. And in terms of, can you study a different course to what you did at college? So yes, the benefit of studying in the US is that you get to take a variety of different classes. And so you'll definitely have the opportunity to take a variety of different classes before you decide what it is that you want to focus on. Somebody says, where do you find the college search engine? So I'll just, again, the undergraduate guide on our website. So I'll just put in the chat here. So this is our guide to university applications. And I found this just by going to our website, fulbright.org.uk, clicking on the Going to the USA section, going to undergraduate, and then it's the guide to university applications. And if you go to the choosing section of this guide, on here, we've got all the different search engines for helping you choose US universities and filter. And the one that we looked at in particular in this session was called the Big Future College Search. So you'll see that one linked on that page as well. Or you can Google Big Future College Search and you'll find it there. Somebody is asking, how heavily can sporting distinction influence university's decision regarding application? So if you're somebody who's applying for a sports scholarship, as I said, you can find more information about this on our website. And if you're at a very highly competitive level, it might very well be that you get a sports scholarship. Typically, a coach, if they really want you to play for their team, they may let the admissions department know, we've got this student, they play this sport, I'd really love to have them on the team, and they'll let the admissions team know, but you're still, you're not going to be able to get into a university solely based on your sport. You're still going to have to apply to the university, so you're still going to have to put that whole application together and demonstrate that you are going to be academically capable of being a student at the university and keeping up with the rigors of the curriculum at the university. I hope that helps answer that question. I've got just a couple of minutes left, so I can take a couple more questions. Somebody is asking the difference between a 2- and a 4-year degree. So the 2-year degree is called an associate's degree. It's studied at community college. And I guess it's not really something that we have an equivalence of here in the UK, but it has kind of a more professional vocational focus typically in the US. And many students who earn their 2-year associate's degree will then go on to transfer to a 4-year institution and do an additional 2 years to kind of earn that 4-year bachelor degree. But doing those 2 years at the community college can be a really good way to save money for the first 2 years. And it can also, if community colleges usually have less rigorous entry requirements. And so that can be good for students who maybe might be looking for that. Somebody's asking, if you are neurodiverse and not outgoing, how do you make your application stand out? And so something to be aware of is that US universities do not want a whole class of outgoing students on their campus. They want a variety of students that have all these different personalities and can bring all of these different experiences to their campus. And so I would just say focus on being you in your application and think about, there's going to be things that you're passionate about in the classroom. There's things that you're passionate about outside of the classroom. And as you're looking at these different universities, there's going to be things on these university websites that are standing out to you. And you're going to be thinking, oh, I would love to take part in this in that university. This university is going to be a good fit for me because of this. And I'm going to be a good fit for this university because of that. And then incorporate those elements into your application. Somebody's asking, would the university pay for your travel costs if your application is accepted? And so not typically, no. And so typically, this is all going to depend on your financial aid package. So if you're somebody who's applying for financial aid, it might be that your financial aid package may include money for travel costs, but I wouldn't say that this is necessarily the norm. I would say that it depends on the student and it depends on the financial aid package. Somebody's asking if U.S. universities accept BTech courses that are equivalent to A-levels. That's something that you'll want to just check in with the university about. Again, it just kind of has to do with the university where you're applying. Typically, the most competitive universities are typically going to be expecting to see A-levels, or maybe a BTech alongside some A-levels. But there's over 4,500 universities in the US, and they're not all expecting A-levels. So there are many, many universities that accept BTech courses as well. All right, and the final question, and then I will wrap up, is when will this webinar be available for us to rewatch? So I typically aim to get it up, sent out the next day. And so I will do my best to get it sent out to all of you tomorrow. If it doesn't get sent out tomorrow, then I'm afraid it would have to be sometime next week that it will get sent out to you. And as soon as I've got it available up on our YouTube channel, then I will send it an email with the link to all of you to rewatch. And that is the perfect last question. So I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. I hope that it's been helpful. I hope that you've had some of your questions answered. And I hope that all of you are going to be attending the USA College Day Fair in London at the end of the month. And I look forward to seeing you there. Have a good evening. Bye.